You know, a lot of people got this attitude that, you know, they don't they don't have to come weeping and mourning before God in repentance for their sins, seeking forgiveness. And it's like the Apostle Paul said, you know, that godly sorrow worketh repentance. The sorrow of the world works death, but godly sorrow works repentance. That's the difference between the two. And, you know, as the writer of Hebrews said, you know, let us come boldly before the throne of grace that we might obtain mercy and grace to help in time of need. You know, but don't confuse that boldness that he is talking about with arrogance, because what he's talking about, boldness, is being able to enter into the presence of God without fear of being struck dead. I mean, because we got to understand where they're coming from, you know, when he wrote that, because you know, the high priest, it is said that they tied a rope around his ankle when he went in, because if anything unclean was found in him, that he was struck dead. And no one could go into the Holy of Holies but the high priest. You know, these were the ones they were calling the chief priests back in the times of Jesus. You know, we got to understand, you know, the boldness, coming boldly, I mean, just means that, and the reason we can do that is because Jesus made the way, and that has everything to do with our conscience. You know, having our bodies washed with pure water, having our hearts sprinkled from an evil conscience. You know, I mean, this goes back to Adam and Eve when they ate of the tree in disobedience to God, and their eyes were open to know their nakedness. They were always naked. Verse 20, the last verse of chapter 2 says they were both naked and were not ashamed. They weren't ashamed because they weren't aware of it. They weren't conscious of it. I mean, we need to understand, because this is what Paul was writing about in 2 Corinthians chapter 5. We need to understand the truth.